My name is Dan Tanz, and I have responsibility for all the price assessments that Platts publishes across the various markets that we follow. And as my colleague Pierre mentioned earlier, that includes oil, natural gas, electricity, coal, petrochemicals, metals, and most recently biofuels and agriculture. We have not stepped into the salmon market nor the trout market, so that's pretty much the extent of what we cover. I was taken by Kay Swinburne's remark earlier today, where she noted that I think she said it that been taking it in the neck from many of her constituents. I can say that Platts feels her pain. We've been getting a lot of media coverage, but as my colleague Pierre Davis said earlier, I would hope that we all withhold judgment until we know that there is a problem. Of course, there are various investigations underway, but to my knowledge, there's been no determinations as to whether there's a problem in the markets that we cover, and particularly in the commodity markets. I also want to take note that Platts has been closely engaged in a lot of the processes around benchmarks, and in particular, all the work that was done by IOSCO Committee 7, looking into the oil price discovery process. And as Pierre mentioned earlier, I think we are just about to publish the results of an external audit by Ernst & Young that I hope will show that we are conducting our business in a responsible, fair, and impartial manner. Also, it's worth noting that we want to keep ourselves ahead of the curve, and we are going to be aligning ourselves in all the other markets we cover along the lines of the IOSCO oil principles. What I'd like to focus on very briefly today is not some of the issues around governance. I think Platts can say it's in full agreement with the need for robust and transparent processes regarding methodology development, price assessment activities, and general good corporate governance. What I'd rather focus on is the topic of data and how important that is to the generation and maintenance and development of strong benchmarks. I'm going to be talking now about the physical commodity markets. I don't know very much about other markets and other benchmark indices, so my hope here is that I can share with you some of Platts' thoughts on how we view the issues around data in the commodity markets. In Platts' experience, in the physical commodities markets, benchmarks are not ordained by the maker or the publisher. They are determined by the marketplace in a process of gradual acceptance and adoption for various purposes. The markets that we follow are complex, they're often illiquid, the characteristics of the commodities are highly diverse, so the process is inevitably one of having a public and well-defined specification of what it is that is being assessed, to have a methodology that explains how data is going to be used in the assessment process, to have other processes that determine that the data that is being gathered is verifiable, credible, and fit for purpose. And as a result, the process is fundamentally an analytical one. In the end, there's always going to be some analytical judgment applied. I know that's not a friendly concept for some of the folks in the room, but it is the fact of life in the commodities markets. So, at the point of inception, a price is just a price. It's nothing more. It has to prove itself and be tested. So what tests have to be passed? What are some of the attributes of a strong commodity benchmark? Clearly, there should be an underlying market. There should be adequate production volumes. There should be the opportunity for open trade, free of bottlenecks. The instrument or commodity should be of fungible quality. And there should be a good balance of buyers and sellers. And very importantly, from the assessment side of things, There should be a clear specification of what is being assessed, transparent methodology that defines how the assessment will be conducted, and critically, an adequate flow of data that's available to the assessment process. In short, any new price or market value goes through an evolutionary process of market acceptance and confidence building. First, it's a price, then it might become a so-called reference, where it might be quoted in various analyses, then it might become a physical benchmark, whereby it becomes widely used in bilateral contracts by market participants. Lastly, it might be chosen to underpin a derivatives contract and achieve financial benchmark status, at least as that is defined nowadays by the regulatory community. So I like to think of the development of a benchmark, the evolution of a benchmark, as a ladder, with each rung representing a stage of development from just a price to something that achieves broad use and brings certain efficiencies to market activity. Some prices remain on the first rung forever, never gaining wide use or confidence. Others may be discontinued as the market shifts or underlying activity dwindles, and yet others will advance steadily to benchmark status. In the physical commodity markets, benchmarks might not achieve benchmark status for any number of reasons, and these are associated usually with the development of the specific market itself. But one thing that will surely hurt the potential development of a benchmark is the absence or decrease or decline of reliable data. So it is absolutely critical that obstacles not be put in the path of that evolution, of a price becoming something more useful to market stakeholders than just a reference. So what are some of these obstacles that we're looking at? Clearly, the first would be the imposition of burdensome requirements on data providers. Market participants will weigh the risks, as they are doing already in many of the markets that Platts follows. They'll look at the reputational, legal, and regulatory risks to their business. And many will simply opt out of what is now a voluntary process. Smaller market participants will often be the first to depart, simply out of an inability to take on the cost of compliance with new rules around data handling, leaving the field to a few large players. So what about mandatory reporting? First off, in the physical commodity markets, this would be very hard to accomplish without new laws. Once again, market participants would find clever ways to opt out of the process. Even if mandatory reporting was found acceptable by some portion of the market, one struggles with a host of questions as to how this would be accomplished. Who would the data be reported to? The administrator? The regulator? What happens when a market goes through a rapid period of change and the data requirements change as well? How quickly can a mandatory reporting regime respond and adapt to that change? It's important to keep in mind a few further things about market data in the physical commodity markets. There's been a lot of discussion about the drawbacks of a one-size-fits-all approach to treating benchmark processes. Many, if not most, of the physical commodity markets do not conform to a process of active data submission by market stakeholders, rather data gathering, whereby benchmark publishers reach out and survey market participants each day to collect data and other market information, and in doing so, employ a range of verification techniques. That is the more typical process. It's an active rather than passive process on the part of the benchmark assessor, so terms such as submitter or administrator don't really reflect the activity that goes on in gathering data and assessing prices in the physical commodities markets. Surely, market participants should provide relevant data that appropriately reflects the participants' activities in the marketplace. Such data should also be in accordance with the data standards established by the benchmark provider. Such standards should be publicly available for review by all interested parties to assess that the standards themselves are fit for purpose. Platts believes it is ultimately the assessors or administrators of a benchmark who must determine the standards of data that they will accept, to verify and test that the data received is appropriate to be utilized in benchmark assessment processes, and to ultimately bear responsibility for the quality of the published assessment. In short, the data must be actively interrogated and analyzed to determine its value to the price assessment process. I'm just going to give you a couple of quick examples of where benchmarks have been emerging in recent years in two large and significant global markets, and how, if burdensome requirements on data providers had been in place in the early stages of market development, those markets would quite possibly never have gotten off the ground, and at least not evolved to where they are today. The first is the global iron ore market, which 5 years ago moved away from a reliance on annual contract negotiations to the development of a spot market that recognizes and copes with the swings in supply and demand and high volatility that has characterized this crucial global commodity. Platts began assessing the iron ore market in 2007 and is quite proud of the transparency it has brought to this sector in terms of methodology, assessment technique, quality data, and increasing transparency, including the naming of counterparties and details around transactions. Now, this is a market where none of that information was available 5 years ago. Platts contacts dozens of market participants globally each day, gathers transactional data, and verifies that information through various cross-checking practices. Those dozens of data sources could easily dry up to a handful or none at all under harsh requirements such as a submitter's code of conduct. The same would be true of the global LNG market, where there are signs of emergence for global pricing benchmarks. Platts and other publishers have not been the only parties to urge caution about putting stringent conditions on data providers. Similar concerns have been voiced by regulators. Both IOSCO and Ofgem, the UK gas market regulator, have warned that attempts to regulate sources that contribute information voluntarily could lead to withdrawal of cooperation by market participants. Ofgem said this would represent a, quote, breakdown in the quality of the price assessment process with negative consequences for the market and consumers, unquote. IOSCO has said that precipitous regulation of PRAs could result in some oil market participants decreasing or even ceasing their submission of data to PRAs. So Platts believes that imposition of formal controls over data contributors would lead to a retreat by market participants from price formation. I can tell you that companies in some of the markets we follow are already actively weighing their risk exposure from contributing to price benchmarks. The simplest way for companies to mitigate this risk may be to simply withdraw cooperation and to decline to provide data. Physical commodity market participants also have the option to trade privately. That would mean a return to opacity in markets that have been moving steadily toward greater transparency and efficiency over the years. Promoting price transparency and building benchmarks in new markets is a hard-won effort and depends on the willingness of market participants to have a stake in price formation. It would be most unfortunate to see established physical commodity benchmarks wither and die, and emerging markets never really have the opportunity to make those first steps up the ladder to efficient market development.